Hey guys, what's up? This is Publik, and today we're going to do a video that's a little different than what we've done in the past, but with the Shadow Priest guide that we released about 2 weeks ago, there have been a lot of really good questions, a lot of new things have changed, so I figured I'd kind of touch on some of these and address some new things that I didn't even cover in the guide real quick. So the first thing I really want to talk about is the patch note stuff that came out, I think it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, that did some nerfs, mostly buffs to the class. There were a lot of like weird changes, and then they reverted them. So essentially, what's happened is we've got a buff to Mind Seer, Mind Flay, Mind Spike, and a nerf to Dispersion, essentially. And that's essentially all we're looking at as far as how it affects us. So, in terms of damage, the Mind Spike buff doesn't make it any more viable than it did in a raiding environment. Surrender to Madness is still our go-to for that. And then the Mind Flay buff is like, okay, that's nice. Doesn't change our rotation at all, so that's good. Mind Seer got buffed. It's still kind of terrible. In terms of like the damage it does, it's still very wet noodle-ish. It just doesn't hit for very much at all. Um, for the most part, though, if you're like doing dungeons or questing and that kind of thing, if you're killing more than two mobs, or probably even at two mobs, you'll use Mind Seer instead of Mind Flay as your filler. But that's really all that this really changes. So the big change here is the dispersion change. So dispersion no longer your insanity drain stacks don't go up anymore when you're casting dispersion. So let's say you're at 20 stacks. You used to be able to cast dispersion, and then after it was over, you would still be getting stacks. So you would end up with like 26 stacks. Now your stacks just freeze until dispersion gets canceled or you're out of it. So essentially, what this means is it's no longer as big of a DPS cooldown as it was before, and it's pretty much just utilized now as a defensive. The best way I can, kind of show this is like, for example, on Nithendra, if you have the rot debuff that you have to take out of the raid, and that takes you out of range of the boss, you can pop dispersion to handle that mechanic and come back in. You don't need to worry about saving it for like a specific point in the Surrender to Madness rotation. At this point, the only real time I would use it in terms of a DPS cooldown is at the very last minute. So like I didn't have to use it for any mechanics to handle any of that stuff. So I have it in my drain. I'm at like 90 plus stacks ish. If I want to use it there, that's fine to essentially help me get to the third Void Torrent, or at least just eke out as much DPS as I can before I die. That's okay, but I mean even then, it's just such a minute DPS loss at this point, or DPS gain at this point. It's not really a big deal either way. So yeah, from now on out, it's just you don't want to use dispersion on cooldown with a surrender to Madness rotation. Just essentially take it out and then use it as needed. So like, let's say you have to handle a mechanic, use it there, or you're like seconds away from dying and you want to just get 6 seconds more out of your mass hysteria dots. But other than that, that's really all that is. And that pretty much covers the patch notes. They said they're going to do a bigger look at this in 7.1, I think. So we'll see what happens there. But as of right now, that's what we're looking at. So now the other question that I've gotten a lot is viability in both raiding and dungeons. And kind of going along with that, preferred talent builds for each. I basically covered the Surrender to Madness like raiding rotation. I'll cover that one more time. For the most part, at this point, we've been in Emerald Nightmare for several weeks now, so I essentially know what everyone else is doing, what I'm doing, and it's pretty much the standard build. There's not really anything that you change on a fight-by-fight basis. We're going to take the same thing no matter what, barring a few exceptions. So we're always going to want to take Twist of Fate. You never don't want to take that. I know in the video I did say I prefer taking Mania over Body and Soul. I'm starting to lean more towards Body and Soul, purely because when you're not in Surrender to Madness, it's nice to have that Power Word Shield move speed increase to handle a mechanic. Like, let's say Elrith is a really good example, where you have to move to the other side of the platform on the first platform. Well, you're not taking Surrender at that point, and you need to move faster, so Body and Soul will help you do that. So almost every fight, we're taking Twist of Fate, Body and Soul. I'm taking Mind Bomb for every fight. I'm not really using it, but that's what I'm taking. I'm taking Reaper of Souls every fight because I'm taking Surrender to Madness. And going along with that, I'm taking Auspicious Spirits in every fight because I have that 20% crit that I've talked about. I don't have the legendary belt, so I'm not really sure the viability of Shadowy Insight. A lot of players have been questioning whether or not that is the go-to, but until I, hear otherwise, or until I experiment with it myself, if you have the legendary belt, still take Shadowy Insight. Otherwise, take Auspicious Spirits if your crit is over 20%. Now that's kind of a weird thing. Let's say you have like 18% crit. On single target, you're gonna lose like 1% DPS over Sandland. I think it's really small. And then on multiple targets, it's still a net gain to take Auspicious Spirits. So I'd say, honestly, if you're above like 17% crit, I would take Auspicious Spirits still. Now, if you're looking at like 10, 12% crit, then I would definitely take Sandland as your option there. But as soon as you hit that threshold, take Auspicious Spirits. And then the level 90 row, we had the argument of Power Infusion versus Mindbender. At this point, Power Infusion is pretty much our only option, I'd say, if you really want to push a higher Surrender to Madness. Everyone's using it. I can't really see a reason to use Mindbender at this point. PI is just a lot better at getting us to our third Void Torrent and making our whole Void form last longer with Surrender. And that being said, Surrender to Madness, I'm taking it on every single fight at this point. You're seeing some footage now of the heroic raids that we've been doing, that I've been playing with it. Even on fights like Il'gynoth, I'm still taking Surrender to Madness. If you guys are interested in doing a whole Emerald Nightmare guide for Shadow, let me know, and I'll kind of see what I can piece together as far as why I'm taking these talents on every fight, and how to use them, and where to use your cooldowns and that kind of thing. Be happy to go over that if interested. So that pretty much covers the state of raiding at this point. That's pretty much our only option. We don't really have much flexibility there. And then we can talk about Mythic Dungeons real quick. I've done at least over 100, probably closer to 120 at this point, so it's definitely done a lot. Most of those have been healing though, so it's not something I haven't played as much Shadow. But from what I can tell and what I've done, you do have a bit more options than you do in the raiding environment. Twist of Fate is still the only option in the first row. We're going to want to take Body and Soul again because we're spending a lot of time, moving faster throughout the dungeon. Mind Bomb, absolutely required. Having an AoE stun in Mythic Plus is just amazing and can't go without it. Level 60 row, this is where I've been kind of doing more experimenting. For all intents and purposes, I'm pretty much taking Void Lord at this point. That's primarily because I have the legendary shoulders, which has some synergy with Void Lord. It's just you get in and out of your Void form a lot faster with higher stacks, so I like that synergy there. With that being said, though, sometimes I am taking Reaper of Souls as well. On certain dungeons, Surrender to Madness actually is pretty helpful. I'll cover that in just a second. Level 75 row, nothing really changes here. Auspicious Spirits is the only option. Even if you have the legendary belt, I would actually probably still take Auspicious Spirits, except for bosses. You can switch that out if you want. Just because there's so many targets, your AS is just going to just fly up with damage and keeping you in Void form longer. Level 90 row between Power Infusion, Shadow Crash, and Mindbender. A lot of you guys have asked about Shadow Crash's viability. For all intents and purposes, it's not worth it. We don't need it for AoE. Shadow is not an AoE spec. It's not. But in Mythic Plus dungeons, especially when you get above like +5, +6s, and even above that, mobs are living a lot longer. So the longer a mob lives, the longer your dots can tick. So that's something where the more your dots are ticking, the more AS procs you're going to get and all that kind of stuff. So we really don't need Shadow Crash to make that any better. And the important thing is Shadow Crash isn't really helping us on bosses, which is something we, bringing Shadow Priest to Mythic Plus is to top boss damage at this point, because you can easily do that unless your group is way out gearing you and that kind of thing. So with that being said, I'm generally speaking still taking Power Infusion and still using it as much on cooldown as I can in Mythic Plus. I might do a separate Mythic Plus guide as well if you guys are interested. And then with that being said, level 100 bro, I've stopped taking Mind Spike almost altogether when it comes to dungeons. I know I kind of said in Heroics I was messing around with it at the beginning of the expansion, but now that my haste is over 30%, I really noticed the Mind Flay procs with Call of the Void and that kind of thing. So I'm either going to take Legacy or Surrender to Madness in Mythic Plus dungeons. The reason why I would take Surrender is if I can get at least 2 uses out of it. So for example, Halls of Valor. I can use it on the first boss. I can usually use it on the second or third boss, depending on how high up the Mythic Plus is. And I can also use it on the last boss. Essentially what you want to get is, yeah, you die, so you're going to lose 5 seconds on the Mythic Plus timer. But by taking Surrender, you're probably going to gain over 5 seconds in DPS. So it's going to come out to be a net gain as far as killing the boss faster. And when you take Surrender to Madness, I am also taking Reaper of Souls, the mandatory level 60 row, instead of Void Lord. When I'm not doing that, so a good example is like Maw of Souls. You could take Surrender on a Maw of Souls Mythic Plus, but my thing is the 3 chest timer I believe is 14 minutes, so you're going to get 1 use out of Surrender. Maybe 2 if you're really fast, but even then you're probably not going to hit it. And Surrender isn't really the best on any of those fights besides the first and second bosses, which you really want it for the last, probably. So on a dungeon like Maw of Souls, I'm usually taking Void Lord and Legacy, purely because I can get in and out of Void form faster. So the last thing I want to cover, a few of you guys have asked about if the multi-target rotation really changes much from the single target one. The one question that you have to do is what dots to apply. So in general, if the mobs are going to live for more than like 5 seconds, you can put both dots on them, and it'll be worth it from a DPS increase standpoint, usually. You probably want to make it closer to 10. If they're only going to live for like less than 5 seconds, just put Shadow Word Pain up. Don't worry about Vampiric Touch. In general, if they're just going to die really quick, just throw Pain on all of them, and then use Shadow Word Death and Mind Blast on cooldown at that point. Now once the mobs start living longer than that, especially when you get in the higher Mythic Pluses, they're going to live for almost a minute. You want Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain on everything. Generally speaking, you want to apply Vampiric Touch first. It does more damage than Shadow Word Pain by itself. Now that being said, that does change significantly depending on your relics. So if you have Shadow Word Pain increased damage relics, then I would actually apply that first because it's going to do more damage. Or if you have Vampiric Touch, relics like I do, apply that first and kind of use that to guide you there. And at that point, once everything's dotted up, like I said, just use Death on cooldown, get into Void form as fast as possible, and that's about it. So, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to leave it down below in this video or in the Shadow Guide video. I try to read every single comment on those videos and reply to any of the questions that I can. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll be back next time.